With so many options, why choose Arizona State University?
For me, the only online option was ASU because of the quality. Their faculty was really involved with their students and care about your personal journey. The dedication to my personal development from my professors, that's been extremely valuable to me.
Earn your degree from the nation's most innovative university. Online. That's a degree better. Explore more than 300 undergraduate, graduate, and certificate programs at asuonline.asu.edu.
This is Wheelbearings. I'm Dan Roth from Forbes.
I'm Sam Abu-Al-Samad from Navigant Research.
And I'm Rebecca Lindland from Rebecca Drives.
Well, welcome back, everybody. We are going to talk about the cars we're driving. So, Rebecca, you had the fanciest car, so I think you should go first.
I did have the fanciest car. So I have to look and make sure that I get all of the letters right in it because there's a lot of them. So it was the Mercedes-Benz AMG GTC Roadster, and convertible, gorgeous, fabulous. Thub, 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 when you turn it on.
Yeah.
As a proper V8, as all performance cars probably should.
Yes, exactly. And I don't know if it's too soon to introduce the word turbo, which has been much abused and maligned this week, but it was. This one goes for, I think it was about $167,000 of happiness. Ooh. And I will say that, it's a beautiful two-seater. It just invites you in and was so fun to drive. I think that Mercedes has done a really good job of balancing road and handling with that kind of sharp bumps that you can, the sharp ride that you can experience sometimes. It's almost makes things uncomfortable to drive. You don't want to get beaten up. And I had one of my friends, my college roommate actually we went down to the US Open on last Saturday. And so, we had some pretty rough roads to navigate. It's in Queens and it's right by the City Field where the New York Mets play. And, the roads just aren't that great around here. And this thing was fantastic. I mean, we really were absolutely delighted with it, as well we should be. But again, sometimes that balance isn't always there where you kind of get beaten up. And Mercedes just did a fantastic job with this. It's, the interior is beautiful. Just the acceleration is everything that you would want in a V8. And it was just so nice. One of the things it had, though, was a special matte finish or satin finish paint on it. And that was a little tough to manage. It rained. The car was in my driveway and it rained and it sat there overnight. And so then the next morning it had these giant rain stains all over it. And I had to take it to the car wash immediately because you can't drive around like that. And fortunately,
did you take it through an automatic car wash?
I did not take it through an automatic car wash. I was going to say, so luckily
not that you'd admit to anyway. Right?
I did not. I took it to a hand wash because, of course, here in Greenwich.
I was going to say they use like fine merino wool hand mitts.
Exactly. So they washed it and it came out looking beautiful. There was a small swipe on it that was annoying, but I got that out. And but you do have to take some care with when you get a special paint finish on it. Now, that being said, those same paints have they've improved tremendously. And so, now it's not quite as high maintenance, or actually it doesn't look as gross and bad as it does when it's, first thing in the morning or covered with dew or something. It did rain again, but I was driving. And so it was able to whisk off. And then when I parked it, it had nothing on it. I mean, it looked like, it was just absolutely perfect, which was interesting. It was a very different experience when the car sits there in the rain versus driving in the rain. Because my first thought was, oh, well, there goes my, very expensive fancy car wash. But no, it actually just looked absolutely gorgeous. The other thing I really liked about it was when we put the top up and drove home at night with the top up, it didn't feel cramped. We still had we still felt like we had a nice experience, as opposed to a lot of convertibles. When you put the top up, you feel like, you're sort of cramped and you're sitting low. And my friend Beth is very tall. She's over 5'11", and not the smallest woman ever, which she knows. And so, but we were both very, very comfortable in the vehicle. So it was sad to see it go, for sure. I also got a lot of comments, both from the very enthusiastic people that directed us where to park at the U.S. Open, of which Mercedes is a significant sponsor, and just around town, just people coming by and commenting on it. And, the paint really attracted a lot of attention, but just the car itself, it's just a beautiful vehicle.
Did it feel big at all when you're driving it? Not cramped in that sense, but just like, did it feel like it's hard to know where the edges of it are?
Yeah, no, Dan, that's absolutely a fair question. And, the hood is definitely large, but the seat had enough travel in it, and so that I didn't feel like I was sitting on the ground. And I did not have that same feeling. I've had that in others. But no, this really drove small. I think it drove even smaller than it looks, because it is wide, but I never had any issues parking it. I never had that feeling of like, I don't know where the edges are. So no, I thought it was actually really just a lot of fun to drive. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually, the GT is not that big a car. It is relatively small, but it has those classic, sports car proportions, long hood, the cabin is set way back in the chassis. So it can be, cars like that can be a little intimidating if you're not used to them, because, you do sit low in the car especially compared to today. Most people are driving, various types of utility vehicles where you sit up higher. So you're sitting low relative to that. And you've got this long hood that stretches out in front of you.
Right. And it is a big long hood. I mean, you're definitely sitting all the way back. The trunk is a pretty good size, but there's really not a lot of storage within the cabin. And there is a decent size storage bin in the armrest, in the center console armrest, so that you can put like your wallet and phone and such, so it's not flying around. But the trunk is really your only option for any kind of a briefcase or a handbag or something like that. And so it's, but it, you are all the way back, and the hood obviously is stretching very, far out in front of you visually. But then once you're driving, then that's normalized. So once I was on the road, then it felt fine. It is a little tricky. It does ride very low. So there were definitely some times when I was afraid I was going to bottom out a little bit, like in the front, but I managed not to, so thankfully. But it was definitely something I was aware of, approaching curbs and stuff. I probably was sticking out more than I was, hugging a curb.
How does it do on the Merit when you put your foot down and make the V8 run?
Oh, that's a terrible experience. And why would I ever do that?
A Merit on the Saturday at night. That's the only thing you got to watch out for is deer.
I mean, no, you're absolutely right. And I typically, so my mom lives about half an hour north of here, and I typically will drive the Merit to her house, and then I take 95 back if it's at night, because there's not as much deer. And I live closer to 95, and I'm not going to run into as many back roads. But this thing on the back roads, I mean, it just, it hugs turns like a girlfriend. It's fabulous. So, yeah, it's nice. It's pretty. I want one.
Well, I mean, you sell your house.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, in Greenwich, you definitely have enough. You're just like...
Well, but this is what is interesting, is that you don't see them very often. I mean, there's just not a lot of them around. And I don't know if that's by design or just, because it's certainly the season for them.
Yeah, well, the AMG GTs are relatively low volume production. I mean, those are models that are exclusive to to the AMG sub brand. So I mean, Mercedes makes AMG variants of pretty much everything in their lineup now, but the GTs are AMG exclusive models. So they do. You're right. They don't build very many of them.
Yeah, which is good. You don't want to see yourself coming and going. Just yesterday I was driving around and I passed 2 Porsche Cayennes identically spec'd within a third of a mile of each other. And that's kind of what people don't want.
Cayennes and Range Rovers are the official cars of Greenwich, are they not?
I was going to say like that. That's just like a family wagon. Probably had like 3 or 4 snot-nosed kids pressed up against the windows on their way to.
Never 3 or 4, only 2.5.
2.5 on their way to the designer dog. That's a high maintenance item too.
Yes, exactly.
On their way to polo practice or water polo. Jesus.
Hey. Take it easy on water polo. I played water polo.
I'm sorry. I should have picked something different. On their way to,
but not water polo.
Just sailing. I don't know. Yeah. Sailing's always a good one to beat up on.
So a brief diversion. So I was in San Diego, and they brought in these 4 Gen Z kids to talk to us for this conference. And this kid walks in. His name is Judson. He's very cute. He's
Gen Z.
Tall. So Gen Z. Judson.
Hey, he was named after a supercharger. That's
okay.
Fine. Carry on.
He has white blonde hair, tan, and kind of that like Southern California, yo man.
I already hate him.
Totally grooving. And so I talked to him afterwards. He was so nice. He was actually very well spoken. And he's like, well, I found out that like my, water polo team plays that other kid's water polo team. I was just laughing. I tried not to laugh like right in his face because I was like, oh, of course you play water polo. Yeah. And then he rides his skateboard to school sometimes, and they have a special rack for skateboarders.
Well, that's cool. I support that. Yeah. I mean,
nothing wrong with that.
That's amazing.
Alternative transportation.
I know. I just thought that was so awesome. So yeah,
I'd rather see a kid riding a skateboard to school than driving an AMG to school.
Oh, well, then you should stay away from Boston University. So much high.
We digress. We digress.
Yeah. So much high-priced iron. It's seriously, like, as a car spotter, one of the best things to do is just to chill out near Boston University on is it ComAv, Beacon Street. I forget. But
ComAv.
Yeah, I mean, you just watch, and they're always all black with super dark tint and like Porsches and GTRs and stuff, and yeah. Anyway. Yeah. I'll let it's not even jealousy. It's just like, man, I chose poorly.
You were just born into the wrong family, man.
Yeah, that's true. That's okay. I'm sure they'd admit it too. So, but also to balance off the AMG GT, the AMG ABCDFG, whatever you drove. You went out to San Diego, like you said, and you drove the Accord Hybrid for a little bit.
I did. I drove the Accord Hybrid for a little bit. This was just it's such a nice, solid sedan, the Accord. I really, really enjoy driving the Accord. I always think it's just good, reliable transportation, and it has a lot of good safety features in it. The Hybrid, I was a little disappointed. I think that my estimated mileage was 41, which I think is well below what they anticipate it was going to be. I think it was supposed to be in the mid 40s. So I don't know.
But that's only when you drive it at less than 90 miles an hour.
Well,
but it feels so good at 110.
So doesn't 80 count? No, and you're right. I didn't. It was 48 is what it's supposed to get, and I got 41. I did mostly highway driving in it, though, to be fair. So, but it's I don't know if it entitles people to the green sticker.
Not anymore. You have to have a plug-in now to get the HOV lane sticker.
Okay.
Hybrids getting the HOV lane stickers was back in the past decade. These days you have to have a plug.
Well, and you know what, to be fair, I mean, it doesn't really matter because the HOV lane is just as crowded as the non-HOV lane. So it doesn't really It doesn't make a difference. But, for improved fuel economy, I think it's a good option for people. And, again, it's an Accord. It's just a good, solid vehicle. It has a lot of room in it. It's well thought out. I was able to use Android Auto with no problem at all. It hooked up right away. Hilariously, and I'm pretty sure I talked about this before, it still doesn't recognize Yacht Rock. Like, I can't get it to.
Oh yeah, some of the Sirius XM receivers don't have the newer channels. Yeah.
Oh no, it had it.
Oh,
it's just the voice recognition keeps wanting to go to Sirius XM 7 and not 70. And then, so I have this whole video recording that I did when I was trying to get the Honda Pilot to turn channel to tune to XM70, and I couldn't get it, so I tried it in the Accord, and it was the same issue.
What if you try 7T versus 7D?
I tried everything.
I wind up having to enunciate, and that's what annoys me about the voice assistant system. It's like, I don't want to have to learn how to talk to this thing.
Yeah, I seriously, I tried everything, and it was really comical. But sadly, with the summer gone, so is Yacht Rock. So
I bet you probably have some of those cassettes and LPs.
I probably do.
I bet your buddy Elliot probably recorded some of those.
I was raised right, and yes, he did.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, so no, the Accord was lovely.
I'm going to send you a CD with just nothing but Peg on it, over and over.
And don't forget Hey 19.
Okay.
Which was written about Elliot.
Was it really?
His girlfriends. It really was.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Last year, I drove the Accord Hybrid up to Traverse City for the management briefing seminars, and we really enjoyed that one as well. I mean, it's a great long distance cruiser, and I think we got about 42, 43 miles per gallon with it, driving up north, and so that I think that's about right for highway driving. And the reality is, once you get past about 35, 37 miles per gallon, every additional mile per gallon, the difference in how much fuel you use starts to get so small that it's almost inconsequential. So the difference between 42 and 48, in terms of, your fuel savings is really minuscule anyway. So it doesn't really matter that much.
Yeah. And you know what I like about the hybrid is that it's not weird. It looks normal.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
Like,
well,
it's just.
Yeah, manufacturers are getting away from that. That the hybrids have to look different thing. Early on, when Toyota was selling tons and tons of Priuses, everybody thought, well, people only want to buy hybrids if they look different, and so they were making hybrids. Honda did the Insight, specifically to look like a Prius, and Hyundai did the Ioniq, to look like a Prius. But increasingly that's no even Priuses aren't selling that well anymore, and so manufacturers are going back to just making them look normal, just putting hybrid powertrains in anything to get the extra fuel economy, and just making them look average.
Well, I think too that there was definitely a Prius effect, because it was, think about pre-Tesla, right? Like that was the conspicuous.
It was the virtue signaling car,
right? Conspicuous conservation. Like, look, I bought a thing, so I care about the environment.
Yeah.
Well, that's a very much a baby boomer attribute. Is they wanted everybody. The vehicle is so much a representation of who they are and a frame around themselves that they wanted everybody to know that they were saving the world. And the Prius told them that, as opposed to something like the Ford Escape that you had to read the fine print, right? You had to look and see if it was a hybrid.
If you didn't notice that little green leaf badge on the tailgate, you wouldn't know it was a hybrid.
Exactly. But Gen X is very different. They were much more understated. We're much more like, yes, we're saving the world, but we don't need the whole entire world to know that.
I don't know if I totally agree with that. I mean, now, that new virtue signaling thing is the Tesla. If you drive a Model S or a Model 3, that's what's, you're using that as a signal. And a lot of the customers, especially of the 3, are those younger customers.
Well, but the younger customers are different though. I don't think that the average age of a Tesla buyer is Gen X. It might be, I don't know.
I think it probably is, particularly in California,
Yeah,
where
but California's
a lot of
different.
Silicon Valley people, a lot of LA people, are those younger customers that are jumping into those things.
Yeah, but they're younger though. They're not Gen X. Gen X is in their
Well, I guess when I said younger, I meant younger than baby boomers.
Yeah, but Gen X is very different than both baby boomers and millennials or the younger
I know.
generation.
We just got our heads down, keeping the lights on. We clean up the mess of our parents, and kids are going to eat our lunch.
Exactly. And I think that the Tesla buyer, as we've talked about many times, is different. But anyway, I like the fact. I think that the appeal of something like a hybrid is expanded when it just looks normal.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I can see both sides of it because, like we just talked about with the signaling and the whole, like, I bought a thing versus it's just a regular car. I think the Prius thing had to happen, and the hybrids that look weird had to happen for us to get to the point where it's more of now. It's a hybrid, but it's just a regular car. It's been packaged so that you don't give up any cargo space or minimal cargo space, and it just works. Everything works smoothly. I think we're in a good place because of what came before.
I think there's room in the market for both.
Yeah, I think so.
I think, a year from now is going to be an interesting time to look back at this and see if a normal looking hybrid actually is something that will sell. Because, right now, for the last several years, hybrids have been stuck at, like 2% or less of the market place. They really haven't grown in popularity and have in fact shrunk because of low fuel prices in the U.S. But, right now there's a whole bunch of new hybrids coming to market, particularly from Ford. And it's going to be interesting to see how much traction those vehicles really get, because they're not putting them into, traditional sedans or, small cars. They're putting them into things like the Explorer, and we're going to have the F-150, and then, the new Escape hybrid, which I'll be driving tomorrow. They have a whole slate of new hybrid and plug-in hybrid vehicles. And, talking to Ford in particular, they are quite bullish on their projections for what kind of penetration they're going to get on some of those hybrids. Like, they said at the launch of the Escape last spring that, for the hybrid, they're thinking, like 17-18%, maybe more take rate on the hybrid, and maybe 5 to 7% for the plug-in hybrid, which would be, a really high percentage for those vehicles compared to what they've had in the past. So, I think this is a topic we'll have to revisit somewhere down the line.
Well, it's going to be interesting to see if they can pull it off. I wonder if some of the drop off in hybrid is due to people skipping to full EV. So if you have a hybrid, like a plug-in hybrid, do you tout your EV only range as a selling point? And the fact that, because hybrids were always just a stopgap anyway, even when Toyota sort of cooked up the Prius initially, they were taking a much longer view, saying, to get there, this is the first step, and eventually hybrids are not going to be needed. But right now they are. So it's kind of, we all expected hybrids to drop off at some point. But I wonder if they
dropped off long before EVs became mainstream.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's part of it is, I think, I wonder if the fascination with them has died down a little bit.
But I also wonder, I remember years ago when I was with IHS and how we defined a hybrid. It was, we considered things with stop start to be hybrids too.
What?
And that's, that's because we were again, this was 10 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, and typically, those, there's been more granularity in that whole spectrum. I mean, there's a spectrum of electrified technologies. You've got strong hybrids like the Prius and what Ford builds, and then there's mild hybrids, which are like Honda's old IMA system, and the current generation of 48-volt mild hybrids, which have more less electrification than a full hybrid, but not they can't really operate purely electrically even for short distances. And then the 12-volt auto stop start systems were often labeled as micro hybrids.
Huh.
Right. And so it's kind of like, how do you count a hybrid? Because you could say that the entire market is going to hybrid because they have stop start. But so I know that's not really what we're talking about, but it's still
Our show, we can talk about whatever we want.
That's right. I think that kind of hair splitting matters to the industry and analysts, and not all
to consumers,
customers. Yeah.
Yes, I agree completely. So now that we're completely digressing,
no, that's okay.
What are you guys driving?
Yeah, Sam, you I think you mentioned briefly the CX-5 the last time we recorded, maybe not, but I know you had it.
Yeah, so I had the Mazda CX-5 Diesel, which we've talked about repeatedly over the last several years. As Mazda struggled to actually bring it to market, and I think earlier this spring after the New York Auto Show, I think we might have talked about when they finally announced that it was actually really truly going on sale. Some of the challenges they had in trying to get it certified, particularly in California. They actually had the CX-5 Diesel certified by the EPA back almost 2 years ago for the 2018 model year. But then it still never showed up, in dealerships. And it turns out that, that the reason why was they were still going back and forth with the California Air Resources Board on California certification. Because, in the wake of the VW diesel scandal, they wanted, CARB wanted to make sure that, it would actually meet emissions requirements for the life cycle of the full life cycle of that vehicle. And so they did a lot more testing and, had to do a lot more to satisfy California that, that this was in fact, clean enough to put on sale. So now it's finally out there. I had a chance to spend about a week and a half with it. I drove it up north to Traverse City. It's got everything we like about the CX-5. I mean, we've talked about the CX-5 several times in the past. I really like this little vehicle, compact crossover. It's got a really nice interior. It looks great from the outside, drives really well, and, they've added a diesel to it. And the review that I've been working on for a while now, it's in the lead, I kind of reference this idea, there's these two bits of common wisdom in business, that it's all about, location, and timing being everything. And, it seems like, Mazda may have missed the boat on both of these, because the Mazda actually, surprisingly enough, sells a lot of diesels in Japan, and in the Japanese, in their domestic market, over half of CX-5 sales are this diesel engine. It's a 2.2 liter diesel, but they've never previously sold one in North America, and they've been trying to get one to market for the last 7 or 8 years, and they finally have it now. And the question is it too late? Is the U.S. market the right place for it in the wake of Dieselgate?
The question is, why?
Well,
why?
Several things actually. As we've talked about before, Mazda is trying to move up market, trying to be seen as a more premium brand, and so having a diesel option in there is part of that, trying to create that perception of being a more premium brand. It's not necessarily a mainstream product, a diesel engine these days, and the other component of it for Mazda, is also trying to improving the towing capability of the vehicle, and just trying to improve the drivability, just trying to make it more appealing to at least to a certain segment of buyers. And I'm not sure how big that segment is anymore in the U.S. market. I think Mazda acknowledges they don't expect to sell a huge number of these things, probably no more than a few thousand at best, maybe less than that. But, they've got it developed, and they decide, what the hell, let's put it on the market and see what happens. So as diesels go, this is a great diesel. The Skyactiv D is unusual compared to most diesels in that it has a relatively low compression ratio. It's only 14-1, whereas their gas Skyactiv engines are like 13-1 now. What that does is it allows them to have a lower combustion temperature in the engine. It runs smoother. The lower combustion temperature gives them less NOx emissions and lower particulate production in the engine, so less soot and less NOx, so cleaner emissions. And it also runs, really smoothly, and it's a surprisingly quiet engine. It's got less clatter than any other diesel I've driven before, and it also revs better than any other diesel. Like it'll rev all the way to 5,500 RPM with no problem. And the 2.5 liter turbo gas engine, in the last CX-5 I drove, that's only got a 6,300 RPM redline. So, it feels, more like a gas engine in a lot of respects, although it's got a lot of, it's got all that low end torque you expect of a diesel engine. So, the fuel economy, when the EPA numbers came out a couple of years ago, the fuel economy wasn't outstanding. It was okay. I think it's rated at 28 miles per gallon combined, which is not that exciting, especially when you can go out and buy, a RAV4 hybrid, that gets in the mid 30s or something like that. I think now, there's a Honda CRV hybrid that's coming soon. There's and of course the Escape hybrid that's coming out. So that 31 miles or the 28 miles per gallon doesn't seem that impressive. I actually averaged about 31 miles per gallon over the week and a half I drove it. So I beat it by quite a bit.
That seems like an awful lot of effort to get 31 miles per gallon, though. Like
that, I know that's what I was thinking too.
And the towing capability of the CX-5 went from 1,500 pounds to 3,500 pounds. And if you're going to tow, a diesel is definitely a better one to do it with than, a turbo gas engine. You're going to have a lot less fall off in fuel economy with that.
And what's the range, like the tank full range?
It's like close to 500 miles, I think.
That's enough.
So
let's put it this way: it's more than most human bladders can handle.
I mean, 500 miles is like that's a week worth of commuting for me. So
yeah,
that's
so
take a week.
So it's got plenty of range. That's not an issue. The only real issue.
Sometimes that can be a reason for purchase, though.
Yeah,
because there are people that say I want something that goes further than 300 miles.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it's not that it's that big a deal. I mean, it only takes you 5 minutes to fill it up. Unlike, EVs that take a lot longer, but still, I mean, some people just don't like to go to the gas station or a fuel station. So, the only real issue I had with this thing, because I mean, it was great to drive. I mean, it was like it has all the attributes that, the CX-5 has always had. It's a good handling, good ride quality. The diesel only comes on the signature trim level, which is their top trim level, which, as we talked about before, earlier this year, you and I, Rebecca, both drove the turbo gas signature edition, which was like $37,000. The diesel
still
only comes on the signature, which is fully loaded with pretty much every available option, all-wheel drive, $41,000 to start. And the one I drove, it has almost all the options. The one I had pretty much everything on it. Came to almost 44,000 delivered, which is a lot. But I guess, if you were to compare it, with something like, say, a BMW X3 or, a Mercedes GLC, it's going to be in the same ballpark as those.
Yeah, but Mazda is not one of those brands. They have work to do.
It's not one of those brands, but, if you take away the labels and, you just compare it, head to head, there's not really that much to distinguish them. I mean, it certainly has the look, it has the style to be considered a premium brand, although a lot of mainstream brands like the new Escape, also have that, similar style. I guess, the question is any vehicle of this class or segment really worth that much money? And, I mean, if what you're considering, is like an Audi Q3 or a GLC, or an X3, I'm inclined to say that, I would certainly consider this in that segment, even though we haven't traditionally considered Mazda in that segment. I mean, the idea of looking at Mazda as a more premium brand, is increasingly feels credible to me. Would I personally spend 44 grand on this or on any other similar vehicle from a German brand? Probably not.
I mean, let's be honest though. Would you personally spend 44 grand on any vehicle?
It depends on the vehicle.
Okay.
I mean,
that Mustang, the GT350.
I have never personally spent that much money on a car. But, I wouldn't entirely rule it out.
I would say, you know what?
If I can get a GT350 for 44 grand, I would definitely.
Absolutely. That's what I'm saying, right? That's a pretty good deal.
I think in today's dollars, I think I probably have, because I bought an X3 in like 2004. That was probably in the mid 30s, mid to high, like 37, 38.
Yeah.
So I have, but it was a BMW. It was an X3, and it was really nice.
Oh, and that
so is this Mazda.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Mazda is going to be
contemporary
much
Mazda.
nicer than that X3 was.
No, it's not. I loved my
No,
X3.
I'm not saying anything bad about that first generation X3, mind you.
But no, it was a second generation. It was a second gen.
Okay.
So maybe it was a little bit later. I can't remember. I'll have to look back and see.
So the current generation X3 starts at 42 grand and goes up from there.
Right.
So as a German vehicle, that injudicious use of the options list is going to escalate that price very rapidly.
Right. Mine was a middle trim level, so it wasn't crazy. But
I mean, if you wanted an X3 equipped like this Mazda was, I mean, you're probably looking well over 50 grand.
Well, yeah. I mean, but I would. One of the things I was thinking about while you were talking, not that I wasn't listening, I was completely, was residual value and resale value. And I don't know where Mazda stands on that. I'm happy to reach out to my former colleagues at KBB and find out. But I think that might be an interesting look as well to see, is Mazda, have we seen an increase in their residual values, even as a percentage of original cost and such? So that might be an interesting thing.
That would be interesting to find out. If you could ask somebody there about that. Because like I said, I mean, just doing a straight up comparison. While, as I said, we haven't traditionally considered Mazda as one of those premium brands. When you compare the way they look, the way they're built, and the way they perform. I think that there's a lot to say. It's not unreasonable to say that they are competitive with those premium brands. But then again, so are a lot of other traditional mainstream brands are increasingly competitive with those premium brands. And even though it has gotten more expensive, it's still, a better value than going with one of the German brands.
It's loaded at that point. So it's loaded at the point where they start. And I think you're right, Rebecca. Residual value is probably an area where they can't compete right now. But Mazda's got to do something because they're still an independent brand, and if they want to stay independent, they've got to find their niche. And styling wise, equipment wise, the way the cars look and feel, I think they're onto something. We'll see if it sticks, I suppose, because everybody's still gonna scrunch up their nose for the next couple of years with the thought of paying $50,000 for a Mazda or $40,000 for a Mazda. That's still we've got to learn to accept that, and that's the fully loaded model too. Like it's not like you can't get a CX-5 for less.
Right. No, for sure. Yeah. So I'll reach out and see what I can find out in the next week or so.
All right.
Great. And then the other car I've had more recently since I came back from California when we last recorded. Oh, and one note about our last recording. When I was in California and I had the Lincoln Navigator. just a couple of hours before heading to the airport to head home. I was in San Francisco. I was meeting up with Ed Niedermeyer and a few other folks in San Francisco, and broad daylight, parked on a busy street in San Francisco at a parking meter. And while I was sitting there having a drink with Ed and a few other people, I got a call. It turns out somebody had found my backpack a few miles away. I went out to check the navigator, and it was parked across the street, and the right rear quarter window on it was smashed. Somebody had smashed the window, reached in, grabbed my backpack, headed for the nearest BART station, ditched my backpack at the next BART station, took my work laptop, and fortunately, the luggage tag on my backpack, had my phone number on it. The person called me. I went and retrieved that. The laptop was gone. But if you're in San Francisco, be very careful about leaving anything where it's even remotely visible. I mean, my backpack was in the rear cargo area, but it was standing up, and I think even though the windows are pretty darkly tinted, if you're looking through, and the sun is shining from the other side, you could probably just see the silhouette of the handle sticking up over the back seat, and that apparently was enough for somebody to decide, hey, I'm going to take that. So make sure you don't leave anything even remotely visible of value in your vehicles in San Francisco. Sure sounds like
another reason to hate San Francisco.
Yeah, apparently there are now about 100,000 vehicle break-ins a year in San Francisco.
And of course, they don't even try, and you're never going to catch.
Yeah, I called the police to report it, because it was a press car and everything, and they said, yeah, unfortunately, unless you got a witness or some evidence, there's not a whole lot we can do. I filled out the police report online, but that's probably the last that'll ever be seen of that laptop.
Here,
this is what's interesting about that is, a lot of vehicles used to have cargo covers, and you could pull the cargo cover
and
over.
actually, most still do.
But I didn't know with the third row seat if they still do.
Some do. The navigator does not, or at least the one I had, because the one I had was the standard length one, so the cargo area is not as long. I think maybe in the XL you might get whatever the long wheelbase one is. I think that one may have a cargo cover in it. I can't remember, but the one I had did not have a cargo cover.
Yeah, because a lot of them now, they actually have really short cargo spaces if they have a third row.
Yeah.
And so
that's what this one had, was a relatively short. It was long enough, to put my suitcase in laying down in there, so it was not visible. But I had the backpack was standing up and the handle was sticking up over the top of the seat. So
wow,
my mistake there.
Your modern tech utopia, folks. There you go.
Yep.
Poop on the street and thefts, and that's great.
Yeah, and it's not even necessarily dog feces.
No, gentrification.
Yeah.
Class warfare. Sounds great.
Yeah. But anyway, when I got back, I jumped into a Volkswagen Atlas, which is, in this case, was the modern edition of the big brown family station wagon, because it literally was brown. And this, I had previously driven the SEL trim with the V6 engine and all-wheel drive and all the goodies in it. This was the first time I drove the base model, and this was like the absolute base Atlas. This is as low as the price goes on the Atlas. And so the Atlas is VW's 3-row utility. This one was just shy of $31,000 for this one. And it had the 2-liter turbo engine, 235 horsepower, front wheel drive, no options. The only driver assist feature it had was the blind spot monitoring system, which is always nice to have. But no adaptive cruise control or forward, lane keeping assist or anything like that. It had the base radio, which has a 7-inch touchscreen, but it does have Android Auto and CarPlay support. And Android Auto, of course, is something that you won't get in certain other vehicles from the Volkswagen Group that we'll get to in a bit. But it's actually a surprisingly nice vehicle. It's a really roomy vehicle for one thing. I mean, if you've got 3 or more kids, that you're hauling around,
and the designer dog. the high
while I still think a minivan is always a better choice than an SUV if you're hauling kids. If you must, then there's a lot of room in this thing, even in that third row seat, and plenty of cargo space. And it's a nice vehicle to drive around in. It's not as luxurious feeling. It certainly doesn't feel as premium as that CX-5 did in terms of materials. It was mostly hard plastics in there, but it wasn't, it didn't feel, ridiculously cheap either. So, at that price point, it's fairly competitive. I wouldn't say it's outstanding in any way, but it's definitely worthy of consideration.
I remember when I first saw the Atlas, I was really disappointed in the interior. I haven't driven it. I haven't spent any time in it, but I wanted less plastic because I thought it was really just very, very plain and a lot of hard plastic. As I said, I haven't spent any time in it, but that was my impression from
that's still true. I mean, there's definitely a lot of hard plastic. On the other hand, it's materials that are going to be durable. They're probably going to stand up well to abuse from little ones and dogs.
But there's a way to do that with just a little bit more refinement, I think.
Yeah, no, I agree. But if you're looking for something that's that's got that much room inside, it has that kind of utility and gets decent mileage. I mean, it got 24 miles per gallon over the week I drove it, which for a vehicle that size is pretty good. Especially considering it's not a hybrid.
Right.
It's a good choice worth considering, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, I think I like that size for the brand a lot. And I think it's an appealing size of vehicle for families. I like the styling of it a lot. I think it looks really sharp. Mm-hmm. But again, I wanted just a little bit more refinement. It just looked a little bit cheap for me. But hopefully I'll get it sometime soon in the fleet and I can take it for a spin.
I was going to say, I think that even in premium trims, there's that basic level of, I don't want to say Volkswagen plasticiness, but they have their design ethos is a little bit spare or sparse or it's
Spartan.
Yeah, I think in the nicer trims they use nicer materials and they dress it up a little bit, but there's still like it's built on this foundation of very price consciousness, very much like the Passat that we have now.
Yeah, well, and I think that's particularly true of the models they sell in North America now.
Yeah,
the Passat. The Passat and the Atlas are both built in Chattanooga. They're built on the same assembly line in Chattanooga. And the Jetta, I think is a little bit nicer, in terms of its materials. Certainly earlier this decade when the previous generation Jetta debuted, it did have more of that hard plastic Spartanness to it.
It was kind of like driving around inside a gallon milk jug.
Yeah, with the current generation Jetta, they've definitely upgraded that.
Yeah.
And the Jetta that we had, our 2010 Jetta, was actually really nice. For a long time, VWs, had that more premium looking interior, but they were also a little pricier.
The long shadow of Ferdinand Piëch.
Yeah, I mean, it was that same kind of more premium feel that you get in a Mazda today. Yeah. I mean, if you want that kind of feel that you had in VWs, 10 or 20 years ago, the brand to go to now is Mazda. Whereas, a lot of the contemporary Volkswagens, have definitely been they've been a little more cost conscious in their design ethos.
Yeah, I don't know that it really matters. I mean, people still buy them. I see a lot of them around. So
they buy them, but they don't actually buy that many of them. I think was it you, Rebecca, or somebody I saw this week tweeted, when the August sales numbers came out, that Subaru, actually outsells Volkswagen.
Yeah, it wasn't me, but I saw that tweet as well. That was stunning.
Oh, it was. I think it was John Volker pointing out that Subaru sold like 70,000 cars in the last month, which is twice what Volkswagen did. Yeah,
it's incredible.
Yeah. He's a good follow if you haven't followed him. He's always interesting.
Yep.
But maybe they're selling as many as they want to. I don't know. I see it. Yeah.
Oh, I don't think that's the case. Yeah. I think they would.
Yeah, I don't think this is much volume limited.
I mean, this is a brand this is a company that sells 10 million vehicles a year globally. I don't think that they're happy selling 35, 40,000 a year in the U.S.
Yeah, well,
or 35 or 40,000 a month in the U.S.
They should do something about that then.
Yeah. Well, we'll see if going electric can help them.
Well, if they wrap it all up in a bus that and use like Woodstock, I think they'll have.
Do you know what's?
I'm sorry.
Do you know what's so crazy? And granted, this is a sample size of 4, and they're all Californians. But we asked those Gen X or the Gen Z kids that we saw last week, and they all mentioned the Volkswagen bus. It's just so iconic, and it breaks my heart. I mean, they could have cornered the market had they brought it out, a few years ago when it was shown. But hopefully soon.
2022 is apparently the date.
Well,
they're finally going to do it.
I mean,
VW has shown so many bus concepts over the last 20 years.
Yeah.
It's worse than, the Beetle. They just never built any of them until now.
Yeah. Well, and I don't know where I stand on that. I was so excited when the Concept 1 came out in the 90s. And then when the Beetle actually debuted, it was a little bit of a letdown because it was just this huge hulking thing on top of Golf hardware. And it was cool for the first year. And it's just like, oh, these things have a lot of trade-offs. They're stylistically interesting, but it's not really the Beetle that we all know and love. So I got a little jaded with that. And the bus thing, it's like, guys, Volkswagen can do something besides the 50s and the 40s. Like you made other cars, and you can innovate. You can do something new instead of this nostalgia play all the time. So I don't really know where I come, because I love all those air-cooled Volkswagens too. So I don't really know where I come down on it, other than to say that if you're a tanned Aryan looking California Gen Zer, and you want a bus, just go get one of the electric conversions. They're all made out there. Like get it. They don't rust as much out there. You can find one. Just get the electric one, and then you'll have the best of both worlds.
There you go. A fine recommendation.
So in my driveway, we've had also an old vehicle that probably doesn't sell as much. The Toyota 4Runner. I had the 4Runner TRD off-road package, and I remember when this generation of 4Runner was introduced. They came up to Boston. They gave us a presentation. They talked about how.
Wait, was it bright? Was it bright blue?
This one was red. It was actually really sharp.
Oh, okay. Because I had the bright blue one that I loved.
Okay, so you loved it too. That's good.
I loved it. Yes.
I came away. I loved it, and but I remember when it was introduced, like back in like 2010 or whatever, even before that. And they gave us a presentation where they said, we wanted to make something that was had just as credible off road as the Wrangler or the old 4Runner or whatever. It's a very popular off road vehicle, and it has that credibility. It's a traditional SUV, and so they did their design. They brought the prototype out to the Rubicon. They tried to break it. It didn't break. And that's the one they're still making now. And so it's been around for a very long time. So I don't know whether the vehicle has matured to a point where it's gotten really good and they've fixed the things I didn't like about it, or if I've just sort of grown into it as the market has shifted and we look for vehicles with personality. And the 4Runner certainly has an overt personality. Some of the things I didn't like about it before was I thought it was loud. The interior felt kind of cheap. It rode kind of crappy. It was a traditional SUV. So all of those things were fine. It wasn't that efficient. Again, traditional SUV, not really supposed to be. But this latest go around, and part of it is probably the TRD off-road trim, but it was quiet inside, or quiet enough. It was comfortable. It rode with some discipline. It rode pretty well. There's still a little bit of numbness in the steering because of the tires and the fact that it's an SUV. it's still not terribly efficient. The 4-liter version of that V6 isn't the most powerful thing out there, but it's plenty. It feels fine, and the engine and transmission work together very smoothly. You get that Lexus smoothness coordination when you're not asking it for everything it's got. So in that traditional Toyota sense, everything has been really thought over and really well done. And the ergonomics feel really old. The nav system is especially cumbersome because it's got this tiny screen, and it's an old system. It's an old vehicle, so I'm assuming they can't really update a ton. But I actually loved the fact that it's got huge buttons and switches and knobs that you can operate even in the winter when it's cold and you've got gloves on. You can make it all work. I really enjoyed driving it, and I took it mildly off road where it rode like a cloud over everything. It was delightful. So yeah, I think there's not too many choices for a 4-door traditional frame-based SUV. It's like this and the Wrangler Unlimited, and I would pick the 4Runner in a heartbeat over the Wrangler. It's just that much more refined.
I echo everything that you said, even about the entertainment system as well. And there was, I apologize. I had it over July 4th, and I guess I must have had something else as well, but I drove it all the way up to Boston and back, which is, quite a distance.
On crappy roads.
On crappy roads. But I mean, I loved it. I mean, I think I drove up on the 3rd and came back on the 5th. And so it was a lot of driving, in a relatively short amount of time. And it was fantastic. And there were so many good things about it. The other people that should consider this vehicle are those with or wanting the Nissan Xterra. Because I think it has a lot of that same, that same feel to it that isn't available today. There's not a lot of vehicles like this on the road anymore. It's
a classic body on frame SUV.
It is.
But
absolutely. It's a classic body on frame, but it doesn't
right. That's what I was going to say.
That,
it drives. It feels quite solid. It doesn't have a lot of, and it's part of it is because it's a short wheelbase, so it doesn't do a lot of that winding up that you can even now pickups. You can feel them you can feel the torsion. This doesn't do it. It's very rigid. It's very stiff. In a good way. And yeah, I mean, I think that I was just driving it around like, God, can you put a plow on this thing? It's great. It's like, it's just like it's that traditional SUV that.
I love the authenticity of it. That's what it's not anything it pretends to be otherwise. And while, the infotainment system and stuff is definitely dated, it's not why you buy this vehicle. And I thought the roominess of it was really impressive. We got 2 large armchairs, like the traditional sort of Pottery Barn-esque with the big fat arms. We got 2 of those in the back and a ton of other stuff. I'll try and dig out the pictures because I'm pretty sure I took some pictures of it. And it was awesome.
Yeah.
It was great. I loved it.
I quite liked it a lot. I mean, the cargo space is really good. There are annoyances. There's still some of that cheap plastic. Certainly, the top of the dash feels a little cheap. But once they dress it up, maybe this is what we were talking about too with the Atlas. Like once they dress it up, it becomes acceptable, but also like what you're buying when you buy this. Nobody buys this without understanding that you're buying a piece of like serious hardware that has. Capabilities. It has a manual transfer case for crying out loud.
Exactly.
It's the inverter. It has a 400-watt inverter that makes AC power, which is great, but it's all the way back in the cargo hold. So if you want it up in the second row or the first row to power a device, get your extension cord. And its USB ports are not high current USB ports. So it sort of like made my phone discharge slower, but it would not charge my phone. And so that's an issue with the modern sort of power hungry devices, those couple of things, but you can solve them. And again, like, it's if you have an active lifestyle,
that's where you get you go get a good Anchor charger and plug it into that inverter.
Yeah. Oh, there's a bunch of 12-volt outlets all around too, so you can get one of the little Anchor chargers that go into the 12-volt outlet too. I mean, it's a great traditional SUV if you want to do something active and put kayaks on the top and tow something. This is one that will do just about all of those traditional SUV things. And it's really one of the few left. So
I actually didn't have that issue with charging my phone.
Maybe your phone doesn't have the beat up crappy battery that my
I don't know, but I don't recall having that issue. I do recall though getting a lot of thumbs up from, I had it up in Manchester by the Sea. And the town is a lot the town is a lot happier than the movie implies.
The North Shore.
The North Shore. But oh my gosh, I brought that thing to Gloucester, and
Gloucester?
I thought I was going to get a.
You took it to Gloucester? Yeah.
I took it to Gloucester. But no, it is. It's one of those great, authentic, body on frame, I can do anything kinds of vehicles, but very well behaved off road. Did not, drove smaller than it looks. Yeah. And as I said, so my brother-in-law has an Xterra that's going to die at some point in time, and he's I'm getting this next.
No, it's not.
No, I don't. I think those things live forever.
Well, I said at some point.
The owners,
I didn't say the next.
Owners tend to be very committed to this.
It's 10 years old. It's 10 years old, and I think I'll have to ask him, but I think it may have 60 or 70,000 miles on it because he basically drives it to and from the train station, and that's it.
That's good. So he's going to put a lot of exhaust.
Yeah, he goes to the dump in it, things like that. But he absolutely, it's the Toyota is definitely an option for him, and he was like, this is still a 4Runner. It still looks like you want the 4Runner to look. Because so many vehicles, they just don't look like that anymore. No, and like the Nissan Pathfinder.
It's great. It looks like a 4Runner, the classical idea of a 4Runner. I think they did a great job with it, and it's been on the market for a long time. But it doesn't necessarily need to be updated or replaced. It is what it is, and so I've either grown into it or they've matured it to the point where it's become really good.
You've just given up hope that it'll ever become anything different.
I don't think it needs to be anything different. I would be disappointed if it became something other than what it is.
Well, and that's the thing is when I saw it, I was like, oh man, I got to drive this thing up and back to Boston. And it's 200 miles solid. And I could not believe how good it was. I was absolutely delighted with it. Yeah.
All right. Well, in terms of pretenders, I'm finishing off this week with the Mitsubishi Eclipse Cross, and it's interesting. Rebecca, maybe do they know who buys these things?
No, I think Sam probably has more inside information on that than I do.
I don't think I've ever actually seen one in the wild.
Oh, well, they look like a Lamborghini Urus.
Yeah, that's what I've heard.
That's awesome.
And from the back, they kind of look like an Aztec. It's a better Mitsubishi, but it's like $30,000, and it's just
that's a low bar.
The 1.5 liter turbo engine and the CVT are a really good combo, actually. But I'm puzzled. But I want to get through the week with it before I speak too far out of turn and say bad things that I then have to take back.
So the Taycan, it's official, and as we're recording this on Sunday morning, September 8th, the Taycan goes into production tomorrow. So they will start rolling off the assembly line tomorrow.
That's super exciting, and I'm sure that they're going to do a better job than spitting them out of a tent in their parking lot. But this is the thing I actually wanted to dig into a little bit was a lot of the chatter is not Taycan all on its own. It's how does it compare to the Tesla Model S? Is it a Model S killer? Is it, and some of that's valid, certainly.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously, the first, the most direct competitor yet to the Model S. Yeah. And, 7 years after the S debuted, this is the first one that really takes it head on. Most of the other EVs premium EVs that we've seen come out in the past year are all crossovers. The Audi e-tron, the Jaguar I-Pace, the Mercedes EQC in Europe. They're all utilities. This is the first one that is a direct shot at the Model S. And even at that, Porsche is careful to not necessarily make that comparison for a lot of reasons.
Yeah, well, there's plenty of room in the market too. Like,
oh yeah, considering EVs are barely 1% of the market, there's lots of room for everybody.
Well, and how is the Model S selling right now? It's kind of down compared to, like, they part of it is Tesla shifted production right to focus on the Model 3 deliveries.
Yeah, but demand for the S and the X has tanked in the last year. I mean, their sales are down by about half this year, compared to last year, because part of it is it's been out there. It's been out there for 7 years. It's got one mid-cycle refresh, but it's starting to show its age. And frankly, aside from the electric powertrain, the interior of the S was never that great to begin with, except for that big screen that some people like. But they're now Porsche is really what Porsche has done is not so much target the S, but try to build a car that is what Porsche customers want, but that happens to be electric. And in many ways, this is more second generation Panamera than Model S.
Yeah, well, and I think that's the key. Is this is an electric Porsche, and it has been designed and engineered to be a Porsche. And so, like, reading through the details, it's there's a lot of just really innovative thinking and very careful design and engineering that went into this car. So it's, the high points are pretty high. I'm impressed with a lot of those details. I think I'm also a little disappointed with where they come out on the range side of things. You would think that they would do better, but I also don't know that that's actually such an issue.
Well, so let's get into that. I mean, I think that has been the one. Well, there's been a couple of things that have really come up this week. One is the fact that they call it the Taycan Turbo, and since it's an electric vehicle, calling it a turbo seems a little dubious. But then again, Porsche also sells a lot of cars that have turbochargers that they don't call turbos. So take that for what you will.
I mean, it's shorthand for goes very fast.
Right. And there evidently will be a lower cost, lower performance version of the Taycan coming, by comparison to this one, at least coming, within the next year, which I guess won't be badged as a turbo. So what we have right now is the Taycan Turbo and the Turbo S, with the turbo running 0 to 60 in 3 seconds, the Turbo S 2.6 seconds. One of the, they don't have official EPA range numbers for this vehicle yet. It's not going on sale here till I think early in 2020. Is that right, Rebecca? Yeah. So they have the WLTP numbers, which is the WLTP is the World Light Duty Test Protocol, which that's the new test procedure that they switched to in Europe last year. And under WLTP, it's rated at 279 miles of range. And WLTP numbers typically come in roughly between 15 and 20% higher than EPA test cycle numbers. So based on that, we can assume that the U.S. spec Taycan is probably going to be somewhere around 220 or so miles of range. The current long-range Model S is rated at 370 miles. But there's some important caveats to consider there. I actually had a chat with Dan Edmonds from Edmonds.com, and despite his last name, he's not the owner or founder of Edmonds.com. But he's the technical director there. And over the last several years, Dan's done a lot of testing on Teslas, on all the different variants of the S and the X and the Model 3. And we had a chat the other day about this, and I think he's going to be coming out with some more detailed stuff. He's telling me he's going to be going through some of his data that he's collected over the last several years. But I think something that's important to consider, and if you look at the, some of the Tesla forums and stuff like that, a lot of Tesla drivers don't actually, achieve the numbers that are on the EPA label. And, one of the things to keep in mind about Porsche is they tend to err on the conservative side with the numbers that they publish, whether it's acceleration numbers or fuel economy or probably in this case, electric range. And so, in all likelihood, the production Taycan will probably be able to do better than 220. And, what Dan told me is that none of the Teslas that they have ever tested have ever achieved the EPA rated values on those various models. They've never come close. There's always a significant shortfall. And part of what Tesla does, when they do their EPA testing, and this is something that for the official testing, they run the car, they charge it all the way to 100%, and they test the range going all the way down to 0. So from 100% state of charge of the battery to 0. But when you actually get into a Tesla for the first time, it's by default, it doesn't actually give you access to 100% of the battery. It only gives you access to 90% of the battery. And in the settings, it says, we recommend that, for battery durability, that you don't charge it past 90%. So, you can't, and there's a switch in there. You can switch it, say, I need the extra range, so charge it to 100% and I'm going to use that. But they recommend not doing that on a regular basis because it will degrade the battery if you charge it all the way to 100%. So their range numbers are based on 100% of the available energy capacity in the battery, but they recommend not actually using that. Porsche, on the other hand, like Audi, with the e-tron, does not even give you access to that full 100%. So you've got a 93 kilowatt hour battery in the Taycan, but they only give you access to 90% of that. And then there's no way to get it to 100%. So by default, your range is going to be at least 10% less than what might be theoretically possible.
Well,
and the same is true, with a Tesla.
But on the other hand, the Porsche can handle repeated hard use. The repeated acceleration runs, the Nürburgring lap, like all of those things are. It's a Porsche.
Yeah, and that's that. I think that's a key component for anybody that's actually interested in a high end electric vehicle, for its performance capabilities. The Model S, will give you, great 0 to 60 numbers. It'll run a quarter mile as fast as almost anything in the world, almost any production car in the world. But it'll do it once, maybe twice. And then the motors start to overheat and the power electronics start to overheat and you start to lose performance and you have to let it sit and cool down for a while before you get that performance back again. And it's never been a great handling car either. A couple of years ago, Car and Driver readers complained when Car and Driver didn't include the Model S in their lightning lap competition at VIR. And, so the following year, they took the Model S and they actually tried to run a lap and, to show why they didn't include it because, about halfway around the lap, and VIR is about a 3.5 mile track, about halfway around, it went into power reduction mode, so like 2 minutes into driving this thing or less than 2 minutes into driving this thing, it reduced the power and its lap time was just terrible because, the last half of the lap, it had like 50% less power than when it started the lap. For Porsche, that was not an acceptable outcome. And so, they're very aggressive on cooling the motors, cooling the battery, cooling the electronics, and making sure, they designed everything so that it drives like a Porsche. So they took it to the Nürburgring and they ran it there and recorded a record, a new record lap time for a four-door EV in 7 minutes, 42 seconds. They also did 0 to 120 mile an hour or 0 to 200 kilometer per hour, which is about 124 miles an hour sprints 26 in a row. And from the first one to the last one, they only lost 0.7 of a second, going from 0 to 124 miles an hour.
Incredible.
26 in a row.
But aren't we going to see a Tesla on Nürburgring shortly?
Tomorrow.
Probably not. Because apparently, the day after the Taycan reveal, Elon tweeted out that, the Model S is going to the Nürburgring next week. Well, turns out Road and Track called the Nürburgring to find out what day they were going to do it. And they said, we have no idea because they haven't actually booked any time. To set a record lap time, you have to book exclusive time on the track. And they said, we're booked out for the rest of the year. So it's
typically about a year wait anyway, but unless you have unless you're part of the consortium.
Right. And so, they haven't booked any Nürburgring time. So I don't know when, they're certainly not going to be, almost certainly not going to be able to do it this week unless they convince somebody else to give up their time slot this week. So we'll see. I would not expect to actually see the Model S, going for a lap record anytime in the foreseeable future.
So, Sam, have they made modifications to the vehicle so that they don't lose time? They don't lose power like Tesla? They did? Yes.
Tesla. On the Model S, no, they haven't. On the Model 3, it does have some more aggressive thermal management. They switched from an AC induction from the Model S originally had both two AC induction motors front and rear. And they switched to using the permanent magnet motor on the front axle that is from the Model 3. The Model 3 also uses a mix of an AC induction and a permanent magnet. The AC induction motors, while they're very efficient and they're lower cost and don't use any rare earth materials, they also tend to heat up more. And so they run into heat problems.
Yeah, I was surprised to read that detail where they use permanent magnet motors because they're just I always thought it was the other way where AC induction is actually more efficient, but it's not. The permanent magnet motors are more efficient, more powerful for their size, and because because they have the magnets, they have a magnetic field. You don't have to generate that with electricity. You're not creating heat to do that. And
well, the AC induction motors are efficient up until they start to overheat. Then the efficiency drops off.
Oh, I see. And the permanent magnet will just take it.
Yes. Yeah. Permanent magnet motor will just keep going. Yeah. It doesn't care. And so Porsche did a lot of interesting things, so they've got, two permanent magnet motors. The rear one, most EVs, they just use a single speed reduction gearbox, just to take the speed down, from the 12 to 13,000 RPM that an electric motor can spin up to down to the speeds that the wheels need. On the Taycan, they have a single speed planetary gear set on the front axle. On the rear motor, they actually have a 2-speed transmission. And so they've got a low gear, a 16-to-1 gear for launch mode, and then an 8-to-1 gear ratio for higher speeds, so it's going to be more efficient. So the motor can spin at a lower speed at high speeds, and so Porsche's done the kinds of things that are expected of a Porsche to make sure that it can provide sustained performance. Another one of the tests they did was they went to Nardo in southern Italy, which is like 8.5 mile circular track, and they did a 24-hour test, and they ran 2,100 miles in 24 hours in a 24-hour period, with average speed of 89 miles an hour. And that included the time that the car had to recharge, every couple of 100 miles. So overall, my guess is that, on the track, and, even in real world performance, that isn't going in a straight line at a quarter mile at a time, the Taycan will probably outperform the Model S. And I think that the real range difference between the two cars is probably going to be a lot smaller than what the EPA label numbers show. And one thing that's interesting, about Tesla's EPA label numbers, when other manufacturers of internal combustion engine vehicles do their, when they do their fuel economy testing, part of the process is, the actual test is run on a dynamometer. But in order to set up the dynamometer to simulate, things like aerodynamic drag and rolling resistance and weight, they have to set the dyno, for a certain amount of resistance. And to get those settings, what they do is they actually take the vehicle out and there's a procedure for doing what they call coast down testing, that gives you the load values. And this is where several manufacturers, including Ford and Hyundai and Kia in past years, have gotten into trouble with their fuel economy label numbers, where if they didn't do if you don't do the coast down testing right, you get load values that are too low. And then when you put that into the dyno, then you end up with higher fuel economy values than you can actually achieve in the real world. Well, when that happens with ICE vehicles, customers complain about, hey, why can't I get, the 40 miles per gallon that I was promised with this thing? And, why am I only getting 30 miles per gallon with this thing? And when EPA gets enough complaints like that, then they go back and actually test the vehicles, because in the U.S. all the vehicles are self-certified, and they don't do the EPA only does tests a small percentage of the new vehicles every year. And with Ford and with Hyundai, Kia, and also with Mini a few years ago, when they go back and test, if they find that there's a discrepancy between their testing and what the manufacturer submitted, then they have to go back and relabel those vehicles, and they end up paying big fines, and sometimes have to send checks to the owners. And I think my guess is that what's happening with Tesla is because it's an EV, and the EVs are so variable in their real world performance, and because they don't have any emissions anyway, EPA is not actually looking that close at the documentation that Tesla is submitting. And they probably haven't actually gone back and audited to see if these numbers are actually realistic. And I think if they did, they would probably end up having to go back and relabel those vehicles with lower range numbers than they have. But I think EPA is basically turning a blind eye to Tesla right now for unknown reasons. Well, I have reasons that I can speculate on, but we don't need to get into that.
No, it's going to make the podcast too long.
Yeah, but my guess is that real world range is probably not going to be as big as the label numbers indicate, or the range discrepancy. And really, if you've got more than 200 miles of range, anything more than that is really more about bragging rights than actual usability. Especially, when you can charge at 270 kilowatts. Porsche says that the Taycan can charge from 5% charge to 80% charge in 22 minutes, which is pretty impressive.
Yeah, that's because it's got the what is it, 722.2 volt system or something like that.
Yeah, that's the average. It's actually an 800 volt system. And the actual charging rate varies depending on what the state of charge is, and the voltage depends on the state of charge of the battery. But on average, it's like 720 some volts, but it goes up to a peak of 800 volts at full charge.
Okay,
which is that's a first for an EV. They're the first production EV to do that. Most current stuff is in the 300 to 400 volt range, including Tesla.
I think the vehicle looks awesome.
Oh, it does, yeah.
I wish it was a hatchback like the Panamera.
Yeah, I agree.
That's my only fault with it. But the other thing that we didn't touch on, and thank you for going over all the technical stuff, is the interior is basically buttonless. I mean, it's all screens. Which I think
and you've seen it in person. When I sat in the prototype, all that stuff was covered up, so I couldn't see it. So,
okay.
I have no idea what it's actually like to interact with that. Did you get a chance to actually play with any of that stuff?
Not really. We couldn't. We could look, but not touch.
Sounds like a very German experience.
I know, it's very, very German experience. Exactly. But there's a couple of cool things, and I don't abhor touchscreens like some of my dear friends, Sam, do. But one of the things they've done that's very innovative is they have a touchscreen for the passenger. So like normally where you just have a piece of hard plastic and there's a label that says airbag on there, like above the glove box, that's actually a screen now. And the passenger, for better or for worse, the passenger has access. I don't think they can necessarily change the navigation, but they can see the navigation screen better than having it like over to the side. And it's a very different experience to have everything right there. So that was really innovative, but it also struck me that it's so funny to me because the Corvette sort of mimicked a Porsche with all of its buttons. And now Porsche has gone completely away from the buttons. So there's a big contrast between those two approaches.
I like the buttons. Give me buttons.
Well, do you like the Corvette buttons?
No. No.
You know what? No. I would like the opportunity to assess that for myself with a Corvette in my driveway. So
yes. Reserving judgment. I like that. But it's just, when I first saw the Corvette, I was like, oh, this is kind of funny because one of the big complaints that a lot of people have about the Porsche interior is that it's all buttons. And it is. I mean, it was almost overwhelming.
Oh, so certainly on the Panamera.
Oh, yeah.
On the Panamera. And, but they went in the complete opposite direction here. It will be very interesting. I'm hoping that the launch is more diverse than some of Porsche's latest experiences with who gets an invite. But so hopefully I'll be able to interact with it soon, or Sam, you will, or both of us, or all three of us in an even better case. But it's a very sleek, very modern design. They did do only Apple CarPlay, and their contention is that 80% of their buyers and their owners are Apple users. I asked Strategic Vision the same question, and they actually got 86% from their research. So the other thing I was told was that because of Android having more of an open source feel or less privacy, that was something else that Porsche was concerned about. But I'm a little surprised they don't even offer and have no intention of offering Android
I think of all the automakers who just really know all of the important stuff about their customers, Porsche is like, their information is probably the most trustworthy in that sense. Like they know exactly what they need to know about their customers. And that makes sense. I would assume that Porsche owners are Apple device owners as well. And there's less control. You have less control over the experience because there's so many different flavors of Android. So I can see why they'd avoid it.
Right. Yeah, I can see that. I was hoping that they would at least have it on their radar, but they don't. They're like, nope, we're not going to do Android at all. All right. Fair enough. You want Android, you buy the Volkswagen.
That's it. I'm not buying a Taycan then.
That's it, right? I'm out. To be fair, I don't know. Does Tesla offer both? I don't know if they do.
Tesla doesn't offer any.
Oh, okay. They don't offer either one.
Unless they make, a Tesla, they make all that stuff in-house themselves. Okay. They don't have Android Auto or CarPlay. You can get Slacker Radio though. They do have Slacker Radio. So
there you go. Well, so Porsche does have Apple Music. Mm-hmm. I think they're one of the first ones.
They're integrating Apple Music right into the system.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, it's obviously it's not a reason to not purchase the vehicle, but it's an interesting strategy.
Yes, it is.
There's many other reasons I'm sure that people will have for not purchasing it, but I think they did
starting
a fantastic
with $150,000 starting price.
That could be a small barrier.
There's going to be a cheaper one, but also and that's why it's like, well, comparisons to the Model S don't really hold up in that sense. Like $150,000 Model S is I don't even know if you can make one that expensive.
Not anymore. They lowered the price on the Model S in part because sales have been declining. Yeah. So I think now they max out somewhere around 120, 125. You could previously get one at a little over 140, but now they're about 125 is the most expensive one. But the other thing to remember always about any Porsche is that that starting price is just a mere suggestion. By the time you're done, by the time you walk out of there or drive out of there, you're often paying much, 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 much more than that. Like a Taycan Turbo S. I started going through the build and price the other day. And I was up to around 210, and I still had not checked off everything. And Porsche will happily take your money, to if there's a color that's that's not on the regular color palette that you would like your exterior or interior or both to be, or some particular materials, or the hide of a particular cow that you want for your seats, they will more than happily go out and slaughter that cow and get those hides tanned. I mean, for a price, they will give you exactly the Taycan that you want, or any other model.
They will go cow tipping
yeah,
for
absolutely.
you.
Oh, you want the leather on the vents? Yes, you absolutely. Yeah.
But I got to tell you, I think I said this before, that the launch control, I mean, I was sitting in the passenger seat, and I have never felt, I don't know if it's vertigo. I don't know what it was. But Sam, did you guys do launch control?
We didn't do launch control, but we did a couple of laps of the New York Formula E circuit.
Right.
And so, it was hard cornering, hard braking, hard acceleration.
It was incredible. So we did both because we were on the 1 mile test track that they have outside of Porsche headquarters in Atlanta. And I got to tell you, I mean, it was G-forces like I've never felt before. It was awesome. We couldn't record, we couldn't take pictures, but I do wish that I had at least had my phone on to record, because I haven't laughed and screamed alternately like that in a while.
And it probably is vertigo, because when you accelerate real hard, your eyeball compresses a bit, so it messes with your vision.
I got to tell you, it was totally disorienting.
Yeah.
Like I felt like, I've never been in an F-16, although I've always wanted to go, but now I have a better idea. It was fantastic.
Well, maybe Sam can hook you up with Bob Lutz. He can take you out in his MiG.
Yeah, exactly. Having driven with Bob Lutz, that was close.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
And, I've ridden shotgun with Juan Montoya in a ZR1 Corvette around the Milford handling track at the GM Proving Grounds.
That's awesome.
And, that's as close to that sort of experience as you're probably going to get on the ground.
Yeah. It was pretty awesome.
That might be one of those things, like, I don't smoke, but right now I need a cigarette.
Exactly.
All right. Well, so I mean, the Taycan seems like it's gonna be a Porsche, like a winner for Porsche, because of the way they obsessively engineer their cars.
And they'll probably sell as many as they choose to build. Next year they're going to add the Cross Turismo, which is slightly taller, wagonish hatchback crossover type of variant of this. And then they're going to have more stuff coming. Yeah. And there's new EVs coming from everybody, there's a Mini E that's, coming from BMW. There's, Ford is going to be showing they released a teaser video this week of the prototype of their new Mustang inspired electric crossover, doing cold weather testing. That's going to be shown later. That car is going to be shown later this year, perhaps at the LA Auto Show. And there's EVs coming from everywhere.
There are. Well, and I think that one of the things that's really cool about the EV market is that we are starting to see some real alternatives to Tesla for people that want a more traditional buying experience, that want a more traditional ownership experience. I love the fact that this thing is all Porsche as well. And it kind of reminds me of, how I felt about the Audi e-tron, where it's just such a good Audi, and it just happens to be electric. So I'm really excited for the Taycan. I think it'll be really cool.
Yeah. Even though I'll never own one.
No, I did read somewhere that there were 30,000 pre-orders for it.
Yeah. And that's what their production capacity is per year. So
maybe next year we can get one. We can get one off lease.
Rebecca, I think you brought this up a little bit in trying to evaluate a car that is it's a crossover slash SUV, and it's sort of tilted a little too much in the SUV direction, and that causes it to have trade-offs in real world life, and I think just expressing that in a review in a way that's fair was what we were sort of struggling with.
Yes. Well, we drive these cars all the time, and all different cars, obviously. And I just found that there's some vehicles that want to emphasize the all-wheel drive, the off-road capabilities, but then it often compromises the on-road experience. And as we talked about earlier, one of the things that was remarkable about the Toyota 4Runner is that it didn't do that. Like it was still, really, it's pretty capable off-road, but it's great on-road. And I drove the Honda Pilot recently, and Honda's actually been really emphasizing their off-road capability. The Honda Passport drive event was mostly off-road, and Honda actually had a specific event to demonstrate how capable Pilot is off-road. But I found that it drives so big on road as well that it was a little compromised. I thought, especially if I compare it to vehicles like the Hyundai Palisade and the Kia Telluride, which are very, very close competitors. They are not necessarily touting how good they are off-road, although the Palisade launch did have an off-road component to it. So I guess I just, it's interesting to me about that balance of how much do you market a crossover as off-road capable, and how much do you say, you know what, we're not going to go in that direction. We're going to show you how well it can do on-road.
Do you think it has anything to do with what they know or what they think they know about their customers?
Well, I think there's still this perception that a vehicle has to have that go anywhere, do anything, I can conquer the world mentality to it. And I don't know if that's true or not. I mean, it's, I think that there is an element of that where people say, hey, I'm buying an SUV or a crossover. I'm buying an SUV and don't necessarily realize that it's not truck based, but they want that perception. We joked earlier, right, that the official vehicles of Greenwich, Connecticut are things like the 4Runner and the Porsche Cayenne, and that those certainly have that feeling of, or that perception that it can go anywhere. So I don't know. I just felt I'd love to get people's input into whether that makes a difference for them when they purchase a vehicle.
Yeah, well, I'm curious about whether they want the Pilot and the Passport to be seen as off-road vehicles, and that's why they're trying to position them that way, versus really positioning them as a solution to people's everyday needs. One of the rules that I have for my team when we're working up a sort of a marketing campaign or a way we're gonna message something is, usually you want people, especially with an aspirational product like a car or a big ticket item, you want them to see and understand how that fits into their life. Some of the aspirational thing, like a Corvette, certainly show it driving on a track, but like a Passport or a Pilot, like they're your family wagon. They're your vans. You want to show it doing those things, not necessarily driving on the dunes in the Sahara. But
the Passport is designed to be more of a personal vehicle. It's something like that.
It's a family truckster.
Well, but I mean, the Passport though is more personal rather than
the Passport.
Pilot.
Yeah, sorry, I thought you were talking about the Pilot. Yeah.
No, so the Passport is smaller. It's the same wheelbase as the Pilot, but it's smaller and it's more of a personal vehicle. Whereas the Pilot is very much designed to be a family vehicle. And while you may go off road in it, which is to say that you are going to drive on a dirt track to the soccer field, the idea that it's going to be going hardcore off road, and that's not really what they had us do. They had us going through some water. They had us going doing a little wheel tipping kind of stuff. But it's this. But I was kind of disappointed in how it drove on road. It drove really big and it felt really empty. And while I was mostly driving it empty, even when I did have people in it, they had that same impression, which was very interesting to me, that was their takeaway as well.
I think the Palisade and the Telluride are the other side of that compromise, where Hyundai and Kia have said, yeah, we'll make sure it has all-wheel drive. We'll make sure it won't really get stuck if you take it up the road to camp in the summer or something. But beyond that, we're not making too many promises because nobody cares. And what they really care about more is like, how many USB ports does it have? How easy is it to get to the third row? Is it comfortable? What do the materials look like? That kind of stuff. And so I think you're seeing both ends of the market there, two different approaches, the Honda approach and the Hyundai approach.
Very much so. Very much so. But I think it's also important that buyers realize that there's a lot of competition out there for mainstay vehicles like the Honda Pilot. That I was talking to somebody on a flight home the other day, and she said, I've got a family. I'm kind of looking around, and I said, you have to think about the Kia and the Hyundai. And she's like, really? I said, yes, absolutely. You have to go drive these vehicles.
They're really, really formidable.
They are. They're incredible. And so, it's just for buyers to understand that there's options out there, and for Honda to understand that the Pilot's going to face significant competition. Yeah.
So are you how do you express that in a review? Because one of the things you don't want to do when you have the nice perk of borrowing cars on a regular basis is get yourself iced out. I always try to make sure I truly understand what the car is meant for and read the press materials. Sometimes I'll go as far as to schedule an interview with the PR person or an engineer or something to just be like, hey, here's what I'm dealing with, because they know. And if you give them the opportunity to respond to criticism, that's how it's supposed to work. But what are your concerns when you have that situation?
I always try and caveat. Well, so first of all, I almost never comment on my height in a review, because I am 0.3% of adults. I'm the size of a 13-year-old, and I get that. So I'm not going to complain about a vehicle that maybe I have trouble getting in and out of, which is why I mentioned my friend Beth, who's 5'11", in the Mercedes, because for me to not feel cramped in a vehicle is one thing. For her to not feel cramped is an achievement. So I try and always,
on the flip side of that, though, I think it is valid, because, there are a lot of people who aren't, 5'11", who are 5'2", 5'3", 5'4", and, for somebody who's of shorter stature, though, I think it is worth. There are times when it's worth mentioning that.
I agree, and I do, particularly when it comes to things like pickup trucks.
Yeah.
Where it's before the Ram 1500 had the split tailgate, the only ingress into the pickup truck bed was through the license plate holder, the rear license plate holder. That's the only step, which is ridiculous in today's day and age. So I mention it, but I'm not going to dock the manufacturer in the review because maybe the vehicle is a little bit harder for me to get in and out of. Now, I will comment on whether it's really nice to get it, if it's easy to get in and out of the vehicle. I may mention that, but I'm very much aware that, and I never want to do a, data point of one kind of feel, a specific, circumstance. One of the things that I have noticed in discussions more and more with people is that we are a nation of this, especially Gen X, we're sort of the sandwich generation. We've got young kids at home and we are caring for elderly parents. And that the elderly parent opportunity, I'm going to call it, because, a lot of people don't get the opportunity and the privilege to take care of their parents. But it's a real concern. It's a real thing. It's one of the reasons I bought my Buick Encore was because my mom at 5'4" can get in and out of it easily. She's 5'4" and she's 85 years old, and she can get in and out of it. When we went to pick her up in the Honda Pilot, she could not get in it. But again, that's more of a notation to say, the Pilot sits high and older passengers may have trouble with ingress.
And I think that's that sort of thing is an absolutely valid point to bring up, because one of the reasons why people look at reviews is trying to understand, is this potentially the right vehicle for me? Right. And, everybody's going to have a different perspective. And, I think the more broader perspectives that we can bring to it, I think I hope that it helps people in making, in their shopping process, trying to figure out what is the right type of vehicle, for my needs. And, it was interesting, talking to folks from Lincoln recently about the Aviator. One of the things they brought up with the Aviator, China is a really important market to Lincoln. And, one of the reasons why why they're anxious to bring their Aviator to the Chinese market is, as a 3-row utility, increasingly in China, you've got multi-generational families that are going places together. So you've got parents, grandparents, and children, young, 3 generations, that need to get in there. And so, especially for the grandparents, to be able to get in and out of it easily is important. And, to have enough room in there and still have a usable 3rd row as well and cargo space, all those factors are important. And, as even here, as we have an aging population, that for a lot of people, that's an important factor here as well, as to, what is the ingress and egress like? What is the visibility like for people of different heights and physical sizes?
Right. Now, the Aviator, they have a height adjustable ingress, but not egress.
Well, it's easier to just fall out of the car than it is to
exactly. But it is a notation to, again, it's one of those things that I noticed, but didn't comment on. I talked to them about it, but didn't put it in my review. Was, sliding out of it, I had to, my legs didn't quite reach when I swung them over to get out of it. And they said something about that they couldn't lower it after the engine was turned off or something. But, you're absolutely right, Sam. It is something that and I think it's also important to differentiate between an observation and a criticism. We're not criticizing something. We're observing and saying, this was my experience with it. Your experience may be different.
Your mileage may vary.
But in a constructive manner.
Critique is it's valid, especially if you have taken the time to educate yourself about what you're talking about. Because otherwise all a consumer has to go on is their website and the press releases and everything is great in a website and a press release. And so we get to try the features, right? So a lot of the features that sound good on paper in practice have flaws, and every car is it's a balance of achieving one goal at the expense of others. That's so where they have put their energy and their sort of focus is gonna. That's why cars are different.
I think part of it may be kind of a misinterpretation of the word criticism. Because criticism doesn't necessarily have to be a negative. Critique. It's critique. Yeah. It's both positive and negative, and saying, here's here are the traits of this product, and here's how, to help people understand, what is it good for, what is it not good for, to see if it fits their lifestyle.
Yeah, what annoys me is the folks who review cars from an overly personal perspective, like, oh, the Pilot's great, but it doesn't handle all that well at high speed sweeping turns. Like, well, that's because that's not what it's for. Like,
well, right, absolutely. And I think that's incredibly important as well, is to look at it from who is this intended for?
Yeah. Yeah, and that plays certainly. There's you do have to bring some of your vehicle dynamics knowledge and say like there's other cars that drive a little more confidently, and that does make a difference. But yeah, like everything is not a sports car, and so you can't evaluate everything like a sports car. And just saying something sucks without saying why, or qualifying it with, it's okay to put your opinion in too, but like if you don't qualify it as like this is my opinion, you're kind of damaging your credibility. It's okay to do all of that stuff, but really, making sure if you're offering critique, it's got a sort of solid foundation of like, if it's an engineering or design thing, like that's absolutely valid. The choices that they made, absolutely valid to criticize. You didn't like the color, that's opinion.
Yeah. And that, this is something that, somebody a few weeks ago, commented on Twitter on the Wheelbearings cast feed. They replied to something, and mentioned, why do we talk so much about where, from the perspective of the potential customer? And I think as a critic, that's what you have to do.
Yeah, who buys the cars?
Yeah, I mean, you have to look at it, from the perspective of what is this vehicle intended for? What is it designed to do? Who is the intended customer? Will it meet the needs of that person? Can it execute the job it was intended to do? And
exactly.
that's what we're trying to do. And that's what this conversation is all about, is, we're trying to help each other understand the best way to do this, and, kind of bringing our listeners along for the ride a little bit.
Exactly. No pun intended.
All right.
Yeah.
And on that note,
all right, I got one last thing I want to touch on,
right?
Before we go, and that is NVIDIA Drive Labs. For anybody that's interested in learning a little bit more about how some of this machine learning, deep neural network stuff works for autonomous vehicles, NVIDIA has put together a really interesting set of videos that are hosted by. Hold on a second. I have to remember her name. It's Nita Sviatek. Nita Sviatek. She's a senior manager on the automated driving team at NVIDIA. And I posted it on Wheelbearings.media, and I'll put the link to a playlist of these 10 videos in the show notes. But if they're fairly short, they're usually 1.5 to 2 minutes long, and it goes through a bunch of the different types of neural networks that NVIDIA is using in the software they're developing, and this applies to what a lot of the companies in the automated driving space are doing. So if you want to get a better idea of some of the things they're trying to do to tackle the problems of automated driving, take a watch these videos. They're pretty good, and Nita does a really good job of explaining a lot of this stuff. And
it's complicated. So
it's very complicated.
Watching the videos,
the software itself is way over my head, but the concepts that she talks about, I think anybody, even a non-software engineer, non-engineer can understand it.
All right, that's cool. Good.
I'll listen to it and let you know.
All right.
All right. Well, we'll circle back. We'll ask you how you did. There will be a test.
Yes, there'll be a pop quiz.
Yeah.
We'll get Danny Shapiro on here from NVIDIA to give you a pop quiz afterwards.
Perfect.
Yeah, that'd be cool. All right. Well, thanks for listening, everybody. We'll catch up with you next time.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
With so many options, why choose Arizona State University?
For me, the only online option was ASU because of the quality. Their faculty was really involved with their students and care about your personal journey. The dedication to my personal development from my professors, that's been extremely valuable to me.
Earn your degree from the nation's most innovative university. Online. That's a degree better. Explore more than 300 undergraduate, graduate, and certificate programs at asuonline.asu.edu.